Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range technical forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided for perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that all long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. Well, here's just a look back at the storm system that plowed through the midsection of the country here in the day on the 28th. And you can see to the south a large, well-organized line of thunderstorms here, a big squall line here. That produced, when it was all said and done, nearly 400 reports of severe weather. On the northern side of this, too, we saw some pretty heavy rain that moved through parts of Illinois, over into parts of Michigan, and parts of Indiana with some heavy rain early this morning. And this system, as it came through, really ushered in quite a bit of a change in temperatures. And what I want you to realize out of a change like this is what's going on in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So we're going to step up here and look at the jet stream level winds midday today. And what I want to talk to you about is that the flow pattern, which is highly bunched up like this, is what we in atmospheric sciences refer to a flow pattern that's very meridional, which means it has a lot of north-south movement rather than being more zonal, which is west to east. And whenever we have a meridional flow, it tends to get blocked up, it tends to get stuck, and it tends to be so highly amplified that some folks get persistent weather patterns in one direction and other folks get it in another direction. We need to talk about what that is going to be, because the deep trough that is pulling through the midsection of the country right here is behind that squall line. It has ushered in some pretty chilly air. You can see as I just fast forward to tomorrow what the temperatures are going to look like. The max temperatures tomorrow compared to normal. You can see the effect of that flow, right? Highly amplified trough ridge system, and it is cool across the eastern half of the United States with quite a bit of heat building from the desert southwest, where there will be triple-digit heat right here along the front range of the Rocky Mountains too. We're getting some downslope winds and some compressional warming. So this is probably going to be the mainstay of the discussion today. What is this pattern doing, and where is it going, and when is it going to break? I will at least tell you this. You will get a near-term break in it, and it's going to be Saturday. I think for most of the United States, this upcoming Saturday is going to be a relatively beautiful day. Now, there's some folks who are going to be still dealing with some rain, and it's going to be very hot down here in the panhandles. But hey, this looks pretty darn good in terms of temperatures for the beginning of May. Now, overall, the pattern that we see evolving looks something like this. It's going to be kind of a carbon copy of this throughout the next 15 days. We're only looking at the next 5 days, but in general, it favors much above average temperatures in the western part of the United States, specifically the southwest. And then somewhere right here in the middle part of the United States, we transition back over into a broader trough feature that will occupy the eastern part of the U.S. And I think to understand when this pattern is going to evolve and change, I need to take you back to this map. So this is a graph that I've talked about it lots of times in our videos, but let's just make sure we get what we're talking about here. It is a line that represents global angular momentum in its comparison to normal. Now let's just see how the behavior of this line has looked over the last year to try to understand where it's going. First of all, I do have last May and June on here, and we can see that during that time period, in general, it stayed almost between a half and 1 standard deviation above average. And during that time period, the jet stream is more zonal. In fact, every time the global wind anomalies tend to peak, this global angular momentum, we tend to have more zonal flow, not only back last May and into June, but look, back in mid-January, back at the end of February, beginning of March, and the beginning of April here. Now, when the pattern broke last spring, when basically July arrived, the global angular momentum plummeted. And at that particular point through July and August, we actually saw quite a bit of drought development in parts of the Corn Belt. It then reached another deep trough here in terms of its position back in September and October. And that was a time period where parts of the Mid-South and parts of the Southeast got very, very hot, and parts of it got very, very dry. We then built momentum throughout fall and into winter, and then reached several peaks, and it seems to be oscillating. See this? Big peak here, then a valley that follows, a large peak, and then a valley. And this particular behavior has given us a sense for how long the patterns we get stuck into tend to last. I'm going to tell you, it's generally about 3 to 4 weeks. So we're sitting right here right now with our global angular momentum low, and as a consequence of that, the jet stream's more meridional. And the question is, when does it begin to recover? That's what we want to be asking ourselves. As I fast forward out to day 10, we still see the pattern that we've been in persisting. What is that? Tends to be some sort of a trough feature in the Gulf of Alaska, a ridge that is building up the western side of the United States, and a broader, deeper trough that's anchored to some pretty cold air that extends somewhere between the northeastern part of the United States, back to the Great Lakes states, and up to the Hudson Bay. This kind of triangle in through this particular area. So we see that this this is going to last at least through day 10, which is out to May 9th. But I want you to keep that date, May 9th, in the back of your mind here, because I think that it'll be after that time period where things begin to break a little bit. Certainly until then, we've got this pattern. See the warmth in the southwest? The dividing line sitting somewhere right in through here, both European and GFS calling for that pattern to look very persistent over this time period. And I'll take you all the way out to day 10 through 15. Once again, warm in the southwest, up the west coast. We see it in both models here, with the eastern third of North America, really the eastern half, seeing near average to, in some places, much below average temperatures. But again, this gets us out here to that time period a little bit beyond May 9th, and that's where I'm going to call into question whether or not this pattern has staying power all the way to mid-month, or does it start to break maybe by the time we get to the 9th, 10th, or 11th. So these are the questions I want to answer in this video. 1, does that pattern pose a frost risk to the east? We're going to talk about that. 2, how long does it last? 3, we've already answered. I think that the pattern tends to break each month, about mid-month. At least it's been doing that since January, and it's been persisting for 3 to 4 weeks. So that would tell me that if we're going to continue on this kind of pattern, that I need to be looking out for the middle of month of May to have a pattern shift after the 9th. I want to talk about the buildup of heat out west and what that might possibly mean as we get into summer. I then want to take an in-depth dive into what's going on over the next few weeks in terms of precipitation, and we're going to talk about the differences between 19 and 20. My last thing I'm going to talk about is what's going on with ocean temperatures and some comments about summer. Now, the 3 maps you've been looking down there at the bottom, well, this is the last 30 days of temperature anomalies on the left. You can see where that cold air originated. Then looking over the last 7 days, or over the last 14 days, excuse me, it's kind of built over to here, and over the last week really set up shop right in this part of the United States and Canada. And what I'm trying to understand here is, does this break maybe by the time we get past the 9th, 10th, and 11th of the month? Certainly until then, let's go after that first question. Is there a frost risk in a place where there shouldn't be? Well, I've got the probability of having a temperature from the European model below 32 degrees Fahrenheit for the 7th, 9th, 10th, and 11th. That's the time period I'm concerned about. Now, in the North Central Plains, this is not uncommon. We see up to about a 30 to 40% chance of still having a frost there. What is a bit more uncommon is what you see over here in parts of Michigan, getting over into this part of the Eastern Corn Belt, where we do occasionally see, for example, in northern Illinois, parts of northern Indiana and northern Ohio, and then more into Michigan and Wisconsin, that the probabilities are above 10%. Now, understand, a 10% probability is, I mean, that's a very low probability, but what this tells us is this pattern has the potential to drop those overnight lows as we work our way into the first week and a half of May, maybe down below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And therefore, that's going to really be a major difference from what we would call normal. So I want you to keep an eye out on this. I am not calling for frost. I'm not doing that inside those circles I just drew here. I'm just saying we got to look out for some pretty chilly temperatures as we get here into the end of the first week of the month of May. Now, based off of what I told you a few moments ago, the pattern lasting 3 to 4 weeks, well, we've kind of been in it now for a couple of weeks. Will it last 2 more weeks? When we look out here beyond day 10, so I'm talking about day 13 through 15, the jet stream, as forecast by the European ensemble, does look washed out. But what I see here is still a few things. Trough somewhere in through here and trough over there, and what appears to be split flow. Can you kind of see one piece coming here and another going like that, and they kind of meet together and run up to the east coast of the United States under that colder air. But we do notice when we look out at the forecast that the global wind oscillation pattern and the atmospheric angular momentum, they both change in their sign, or at least their trend, beyond May 9th. And at this particular point, May 9th, the Madden-Julian oscillation is going to complete a 4-week cycle, going back to where it started about a month ago. And even though it'll be doing this in the null phase, it's moving. Here's the other part of this. When we look at the upper levels of the atmosphere, I notice that right now where the East Pacific oscillation is very positive, and that's where you get this big trough here and a ridge sitting in that area, okay? The East Pacific oscillation tends to want to come down around May 7th, 8th, and 9th and bottom out. Now, the current operational model then keep it somewhere right around average, but there's a pretty big spread on that, as you can see. When looking at the ensembles, all the way out through the next 45 days. Here's that May 9th time period. And what we see here is that maybe the potential is for it to come back up, but maybe if we just follow the mean of the ensembles, it may stick somewhere in this area, which means maybe not a full recovery over to the highly amplified pattern it is now. Again, we just see that break sometime around, May 9th, 10th, and 11th is just the story that I'm putting out for you here. Next, if I go to the tropics, we see that going back back to the end of March, the Southern Oscillation Index bottomed out here at the beginning of April and has been rising ever since, all right? So this is maybe this 1 month's worth of change. And what we've now noticed is that in the forecast right here, where you see these warmer colors, a westerly wind burst is forecast to emerge, and where you see these cooler colors, and stronger easterly winds are showing up. And that is certainly a change over what we've been seeing over the last month or so. So again, I'm trying to pick up on when the pattern I think is going to adjust and change forward. Now, just to let you know, whenever we see the Southern Oscillation Index down here in this negative territory, it tends to favor this kind of pattern, which is a ridge that builds here along the west coast of the United States, which we've been seeing, and troughing here over the Canadian Maritimes in the eastern part of North America. And that is certainly the pattern that this has got us into, because that's what we're in right now. Ridge out west, building in the heat, trough over the north and east, building in the cooler weather. The question is, what is the lag on this? In other words, if change is coming, and that's what I'm defining for you over here, is it a week from now? Is it 10 days from now? Is it 15 days from now? It seems to be at least a week in the lag when we have a change in the tropics being realized in the jet stream flow. So, my case, I think, is maybe even captured a little bit right now in the European weekly forecast and the CFSV2 weekly forecast. And what it says is, I think there's some moderation coming into the temperatures after May 9th through 11th. So after May 9th through 11th. If you look out here from the 12th through the 19th, what we see is much less in terms of the deviation from normal on the cooler side of things. But still the models want to hang on to that warmer bias during that week 3 time period. We can see that also in the CFSV2 model. See how warm things are in the western part of North America here, but we are now seeing less extreme cool anomalies inside that circle. And that to me is a very good thing. I think we all want to be seeing that as we move forward. Now, what does this mean towards precipitation? I told you a few moments ago I'm going to compare this to 2019. So during this same time period, May 1st through May 15th, this is what the jet stream did to us a year ago. It came into this highly amplified high over low pattern across the west and then ejected into the southern part of the United States, and it rose up over a sizable ridge that was sitting here. Now, what did that do to precipitation? Look at how wet things were inside of that area I just circled here. And this allowed at times, coming over the top of this, cold air to invade. That was the cool anomalies to begin May of 2019, while the ridge over the southeast kept things very warm here. So, just to remind you what that looked like, I went back to my forecast video 1 year ago right now, and look at how wet we were forecasting things. And here comes in that cold air racing out of the Canadian prairies. Well, you saw what we were forecast to get, and this is just another reiteration of that. It is a much different pattern that we have this year versus last. Over the next 15 days, we do see the wetter than average conditions here, but a lot of what you see right in through there is coming, in the next 24 hours. We still continue to see drier conditions that stretch through the western Corn Belt, all the way down to Texas, and even back over here into the western United States. And our temperature pattern, kind of shown here by looking in the middle of that time period, favors much above average temperatures here with the cooler than average weather there. Again, this is just looking out here over the next 10 days or so, next 10 to 15 days. All right, so from there, let's take a look at who's going to get some breaks in the precipitation to, I think, get back into the fields, remembering that it's going to be warmer the farther west you go. All right, so let's just play this. Now, what you're going to watch here is an animation where we slide through looking at 24-hour time slots at a shot, okay? So this is basically the next 24 hours. You can see how wet things are going to be here. And as we talked about, notice that in the near term, there in the eastern part of the United States, things are getting really, really soaking wet right here along the eastern seaboard. But do notice that after we get past, today on Wednesday, Thursday into Friday, the midsection of the country is going over to a drier time period. When do we see precipitation coming back in? Well, this is all the way out here now to Saturday morning. We're now working through the day on Saturday. We're going to watch for some light precipitation, overall relatively light precipitation as we go from Saturday into Sunday, just developing right here in the midsection of the country. And that just pulls on through the eastern Corn Belt to start early next week, as you can see here. But then once again, behind it, it's light precipitation coming over that ridge. It's way different from a year ago where stuff was coming underneath it with that trough and just soaking this section of the country. Much different flow pattern with that. And so the precipitation amounts that you see here over a 24-hour time period, just getting 1/10 to 2/10 of an inch, this is not the heavy rainfall events that we saw a year ago. And so more often than not, the rainfall is light, and it tends to not be coming in these giant, just deluge flood type events that we saw back in 2019. That's a major difference. So if I look out there only at week 2, this is the GFS ensemble, this is the European ensemble. We tend to see in both models that they're trying to keep a section down here and then part of maybe the mid-Atlantic over on the slightly wetter side of things. You can see it in the GFS in the same area. But surrounding that, near average to less than average precipitation. As you just saw, it doesn't mean no rain, it just means less than average. If I were to show you these same maps from 1 year ago, we were way on this part of the color spectrum, all in through this area. Okay, so major difference from a year ago, and therefore I think we're going to be able to continue to make quite a bit of progress, especially as you go west and north in the Corn Belt to get the warmer conditions and to get the drier conditions. Now that's something I want to talk with you about, because today we have excessive heat warnings in the southwest. We have red flag warnings due to high winds in the central plains, and you only get red flag warnings if the soil is dry. Where's all the moisture? Well, the flood watches are out for the east as that system pulls through that went through the midsection of the country yesterday. And as we finish this up, I want to be talking about what's happening in the central plains, because over the last 30 days, and no, this map does not include the heavy rain from yesterday. Okay, we'll get that tomorrow morning. We see that there's a big section of the mid part of the country that's sitting somewhere between 30 and 70% of normal rainfall. So I'm talking specifically about this area right in through here. That's why there's red flag warning with the strong winds. We have seen that area since the beginning of the month dry out too. This is a map showing soil moisture anomaly change over the last month, and you can see how much we've dried out that area. Now, why I bring this up is because I want to be watching carefully this section of the United States, and also, to be honest with you, the Front Range. Well, really, the high plains here, getting up to the Front Range. And the reason why I'm doing that is because, again, that's just a snapshot of temperatures on Thursday. Whenever we see very warm conditions building down here, well, we need to understand what that might mean for the following months. Now, I need you, as I go through the last part of this video, to take what I'm about to say, understanding that there's uncertainty in this. This isn't a slam dunk. But what I did was I went out into the southwestern part of the United States and I recreated a 70-year time series of temperatures. And I wanted to look at these really warm time periods here, going back over the last 70 years. And I wanted to know what happened in the following months. So this is what you've got. These Junes that you see here, these were years that I got by finding the warmest Mays over the southwestern part of the United States, okay? And what I wanted to know was what happened in the following June if I put them all together in a composite. And the jet stream, go back to that meridional versus zonal flow, got very bunched up. And there was a large ridge there, and there was a large ridge that centered itself in the middle part of the United States. And as a consequence of that, we were able to continue to heat this up in June and dry it out. Now, in some of those years, the pattern broke into the month of July, and in some of those years, it didn't. So what I'm wanting you to see here is that I do have some concern that as we move through the month of May, if, please hear that, if it stays very hot under where I'm kind of coloring right now, there is the chance we could see some early drought development in the midsection of the United States. And that just starts to get us a bit concerned. It's just something we're going to watch. I'm not right now calling for anything other than for you to keep an eye on this with me, okay? And what I want to finish with is I want to talk about what our longer range models have been discussing for a while, or been forecasting for a while. And that's this. You see, we've noticed that as we get toward the middle end of summer, the models have been projecting cooler than average water to emerge off the west coast of South America. We can actually see the warm water beneath the Pacific Ocean surface here slowly beginning to emerge, which is giving us some more confidence that this might happen. Now here's the other three pieces I want you to watch. Unlike last fall, we might be going into a negative Indian Ocean dipole event here. We could also see much above average temperatures in the main development region for hurricanes there, which, if coinciding with maybe the development of weak La Nina, could mean a very active hurricane season. The ultimate competition, especially for the western and central part of the United States, will be if the trade winds are strong enough to slow the North Pacific jet stream to change the position of the ridge from being here to being there. Right now, if you leave the North Pacific as warm as it's currently forecast, this will keep more heat west. What I'm asking you to watch with me is to see if this forecast verifies throughout, well, at least the next 2 months, because that could be the key in understanding if we see any sort of heat and drought development in the midsection of the United States stretching into the Canadian prairies. So again, as I've said, when we look at these things at this particular time in the year, we're just watching for some signals. We are not making a call on summer yet. I'm just telling you some stuff I want you to watch with me, all right? But now that we have a little bit better understanding of what meridional flow is versus zonal flow, we can be looking for those changes as we progress through the month of May and watch the pattern evolve, all right? I'm going to wrap it up there. I look forward to talking again tomorrow morning with a new short-range forecast. And with that, we'll end it here. Thank you.